produced the Beatles. He produced Tina Turner. He created the wall of sound. And on a February night in his California castle, he created a silence that would never be explained. Miles' ghost hunter here. Lana Clarkson walked into Phil Spector's home at 3 in the morning. She never walked out. The call came into the Alhambra Police Department at 5 o'clock in the morning on February 3rd, 2003. A driver was on the phone. His voice was shaking. His English was heavily accented, Brazilian Portuguese bleeding through every word. He said his employer had just walked out of a castle carrying a firearm. He said his employer had said something he could not forget. 5 words in a quiet voice on the front lawn in the California darkness. "I think I killed somebody." The dispatcher asked for the address. The driver gave it. The dispatcher typed it into the system and paused. Pyrenees Castle, Grandview Drive, the home of Phil Spector. And if you do not know that name, you do not know American music, because Phil Spector's fingerprints are on the soundtrack of the second half of the 20th century. Quote 1, quote 2, quote 3. He produced the Ronettes. He produced the Crystals. He produced Ike and Tina Turner. He produced John Lennon's first solo album after the Beatles broke up. He produced George Harrison's underscore, quote, for, underscore. He produced the Ramones. He mixed the Beatles' final album, Let It Be. He was, by almost any measure, one of the 3 most important record producers in the history of popular music. And on that February morning, his driver was standing on his lawn holding a phone, repeating what he had heard. 5 words. "I think I killed somebody." The patrol units arrived 7 minutes later. They pulled up the long driveway through the iron gates. The castle loomed above them. A real castle, built in 1925, 33 rooms, turrets, a moat, stone walls. A fantasy of European aristocracy transplanted to suburban California. They approached with weapons drawn. The front door was open. Inside, in the foyer, there was a woman slumped in a chair. Blonde hair, black dress, 40 years old. Blood on her dress and on the carpet beneath her. A revolver on the floor 2 feet from her left foot. And Phil Spector, 62 years old, standing in the doorway of the kitchen in a white shirt and black pants, his hands in the air. He said the same 5 words to the officers. "I think I killed somebody." They did not know yet who the woman was. She had no identification on her. The purse on the floor beside the chair was hers, but the purse did not matter in that moment. What mattered was the body, and the weapon, and the house, and the man. They put Phil Spector in handcuffs. They led him outside. He resisted, or he seemed to resist depending on which officer you later asked, and he was tased. He went down on the lawn of his own castle as the sun began to come up over Alhambra. The woman's name was Lana Clarkson, and to tell you how she ended up in that chair, I have to take you back. Not to the night before, farther back. Because to understand Lana Clarkson's death, you have to understand Lana Clarkson's life, and you have to understand that she was not just a name on a police report. She was a woman. She was 40 years old. She had been in Los Angeles for more than 2 decades. She had a mother named Donna who loved her. She had a sister. She had dreams. And she had those dreams taken from her one at a time over the course of her life. And she was still fighting. And on the last night of her life, she was still fighting. And I want you to remember that. Lana Clarkson was born in Long Beach, California, in April of 1962. She grew up in Sonoma County. She was tall, over 6 feet, and blonde, and striking. And from the time she was a teenager, everybody who saw her said she should be in the movies. She moved to Los Angeles at 18. She got her first small part in 1982. She got bigger parts through the 1980s. Her biggest role came in 1985, a B movie called ___, quote, _8__, where she played the lead. It was a fantasy film, low budget, the kind of movie that played on cable at 2 in the morning. It made her a cult figure. It did not make her a star. She spent the next 15 years trying to become a star. She auditioned. She took acting classes. She took small roles in television shows. She did commercials. She modeled. And the work got thinner. The parts got smaller. Hollywood is a city that chews through women in their 20s and spits them out in their 30s. And Lana Clarkson was 35, and then 38, and then 40. And the phone was not ringing the way it used to ring. In 2001, she broke both of her wrists in an accident. She could not work for 8 months. Her savings evaporated. She took a job at the House of Blues on Sunset Boulevard as a VIP hostess. The House of Blues was the hottest club on the Sunset Strip, a restaurant and music venue where the celebrities came to be seen. Her job was to greet the celebrities, to walk them to their tables, to make them feel important. She was good at it. She was beautiful and charming, and she knew how to handle people who thought they were more important than they were. She was making $8 an hour plus tips. She was 40 years old. She had a one-bedroom apartment. She was a waitress. 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 40 years old. She had a one-bedroom apartment in Venice. She had a mother who called her every week. She had a cat. She was trying to save money to make a short film that she hoped would restart her career. Her mother told the police later that she was optimistic. She was tired. But she was optimistic. On the night of February 2nd, 2003, Lana Clarkson came to work at the House of Blues at 7 o'clock in the evening. It was a Sunday. The foundation room, the VIP section upstairs, was busy. She was working the door, checking names off the list, escorting guests to their tables. She had been at work for 7 hours when, around 2 o'clock in the morning on February 3rd, a small man in a large jacket walked up to the velvet rope. She did not recognize him. That was her first mistake in a professional sense. Phil Spector was 62 years old, 5'5", and he was wearing a curly wig that looked like a clown's hair. He had been a recluse for years. He had not been photographed in public often. He had not produced a record in over 20 years. He was, in the year 2003, a legend of a past era. And to a 40-year-old hostess, he was just another small, older man trying to get into the VIP room. She did not let him in. She told him, politely, that he was not on the list. He was agitated. He told her who he was. She still did not recognize the name. A manager came over. The manager knew. The manager apologized. Lana apologized. They let him in. They put him at a good table. He ordered drinks. And here is where the investigation would later trace the beginning of the end. Because Phil Spector was drinking heavily that night. He had been at other bars earlier. He had been at Dan Tanner's. He had been at Trader Vic's. He had been drinking for hours. And when he sat down at the House of Blues and ordered another drink, he saw Lana Clarkson, and he invited her to come to his table on her break. She came. They talked for a while. They drank together. The club was closing. He invited her back to his home for one more drink. She said yes. Now I want you to hear something very clearly. I want you to hear this because the defense of Phil Spector, across 2 trials and 6 years of legal proceedings, would be built almost entirely around this moment, around the question of what Lana Clarkson was doing, getting into a car with a stranger at 2 in the morning, around the question of what kind of woman goes home with a man she has just met, around the question, and the defense attorneys would never say it this plainly, but they would say it 100 different ways, around the question of whether Lana Clarkson deserved what happened to her. She did not deserve what happened to her. There is no way to phrase that question that does not lead to an answer that is a crime. A woman accepting a drink at a man's home is not consent to her own death. A woman accepting a ride is not consent to her own death. A woman being tired and lonely and 40 and working a club job on a Sunday night and saying yes to a famous producer who offers her one more drink, that is not consent to her own death. It is a decision. It is a decision that, in a functional world with functional men, leads to a drink and a conversation and a ride home. It led, on this night, to a castle in Alhambra, and to a chair in the foyer, and to a loaded revolver, and to her mother getting a phone call from the Los Angeles County coroner a few hours later. Phil Spector's driver was a man named Adriano De Souza. He was Brazilian. He had been in the United States for a few years. He had a wife. He had children. He spoke English as a second language, and he spoke it with difficulty, and his employer had hired him in part because his English was poor, and because he was therefore less likely to cause problems. He drove for Phil Spector at night. He was paid in cash. He waited in the car. On that night, he picked Phil Spector up at the House of Blues at around 2:15 in the morning. Lana Clarkson got into the back seat. She was laughing. She seemed fine. She seemed tired but relaxed. De Souza drove them to Pyrenees Castle in Alhambra, a 30-minute drive in the middle of the night. He pulled up to the castle. Phil Spector and Lana Clarkson got out. They went inside. Adriano De Souza parked the car in the driveway, behind the fountain, and he waited. This is what drivers do. They wait. They wait outside the homes of their employers, and they smoke cigarettes, and they listen to the radio, and they check the time, and they hope that the employer finishes whatever he is doing and comes back out. Because the employer owns the night, and the driver only borrows it. Adriano De Souza waited. He waited for 2 hours. It was almost 5 in the morning. And then, he testified, he heard something. A sound from inside the castle. He was not sure what it was. It was a loud, sharp sound, like a door slamming, or something falling, or, and he would testify to this in court in Los Angeles County Superior Court 6 years later, or it was a firearm being discharged. He did not move. He was the driver. You do not walk into the castle. You wait until you are called. A minute passed, maybe 2. And then the back door of the castle opened, and Phil Spector walked out into the driveway. He was holding a revolver. The revolver was still warm. De Souza would testify to this, would testify to the fact that he could see the producer's hand around the grip, and that the body language of the older man was strange, was wrong, was that of a man who had just done something that he could not undo. Phil Spector walked toward the car. Adriano De Souza rolled down the window, and Phil Spector said 5 words. 5 words that De Souza would repeat in 2 police stations, in 2 grand jury rooms, and in 2 criminal trials over the following 6.5 years. 5 words that the defense attorneys would try and try and try to pick apart, to explain away, to argue were mistranslated or misheard or misremembered. __quote _9__. Adriano De Souza did not say anything. He picked up his cell phone. He called 911. The producer wandered back toward the castle. The driver began, they found out, over the course of the following weeks and months, would reshape the entire case. Because Phil Spector, the man whose records had defined an era of American popular music, had been pointing firearms at women for 40 years. The first woman came forward within days of the arrest. Her name was Dorothy Melvin. She was a talent manager. She had been the personal manager of the comedian Joan Rivers for over 2 decades. And in 1993, 10 years before the death of Lana Clarkson, Dorothy Melvin had gone on a date with Phil Spector. She had gone back to his home. She had fallen asleep on his couch, and she had woken up to find Phil Spector standing over her with a revolver in his hand, pointed at her face. He was drunk. He was screaming. He told her to get out. She got out. She ran to her car, and as she was driving away, he came out of the house and he pointed the revolver at her through her car window. And he pulled the trigger on the dashboard of her own vehicle. He did not shoot her. He shot her car. She drove to a police station. She filed a report. The report existed in the files of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department for 10 years. It had gone nowhere. The second woman came forward a week later. Her name was Melissa Grosvenor. In 1991, she had gone to Phil Spector's home for a dinner date. After dinner, when she said she wanted to leave, he had blocked the door. He had pulled out a firearm. He had held the firearm to her head, and he had told her that if she tried to leave the house, he would kill her. She spent the night in a chair in his living room, awake, watching him, waiting for him to fall asleep so she could escape. When he finally passed out from alcohol, she walked out of the house at dawn. The third woman was named Stephanie Jennings. She was a photographer. In 1995, she had been in a hotel suite in New York City with Phil Spector. She had been his guest at a music industry event. When she tried to go to her own room at the end of the night, he had pulled out a firearm and told her to sit down. She had sat down. He had held her at gunpoint for 2 hours before she was able to talk her way out of the room. The fourth woman was named Diane Ogden Halder. She had dated Phil Spector in the 1990s. She described the same pattern: a drink, a good night, and then, as the evening turned toward morning, the revolver, the screaming, the threats. The fifth woman was named Deborah Robitaille. She had worked for Phil Spector in the 1970s as a production coordinator. She described an incident at his home where he had pointed a revolver at her head and told her that if she tried to leave the room, he would kill her. She had been 23 years old at the time. 5 women, 5 different decades, 5 different states, 5 different contexts, and one identical pattern: a man, a drink, a home, a woman trying to leave, a revolver. The prosecution had something that changed the case entirely. They had a pattern. They had what prosecutors call __, quote, _10, _, evidence. And they argued, in the years leading up to the first trial, that the jury needed to hear from these 5 women because the pattern of behavior they described was not a coincidence. It was not 5 different women misremembering 5 different nights. It was a man who, for 40 years, had been pointing firearms at women in his home when those women tried to leave. And on one specific night in February of 2003, that behavior had reached its logical and fatal conclusion. The judge, a Superior Court judge named Larry Paul Fidler, ruled that 4 of the 5 women would be allowed to testify. The defense fought the ruling, appealed the ruling, and lost. The evidence would come in, and the defense, now facing a trial where the jury would hear, one after another, from women who had survived what Lana Clarkson had not survived, began to assemble the most expensive forensic defense team in the history of California criminal law. They hired Henry Lee, Dr. Henry Lee, a Taiwanese-American forensic scientist, the most famous forensic expert in the United States, a man who had testified in the O.J. Simpson trial, a man who had testified in the JonBenet Ramsey investigation, a man whose name on a defense witness list was worth, by some estimates, hundreds of thousands of dollars because of the credibility his name carried with juries. They hired Michael Baden, a forensic pathologist who had testified in the John F. Kennedy assassination hearings. They hired Vincent DeMaio, an expert on gunshot wounds. They hired, one by one, the most credentialed forensic experts in America, and they pointed all of them at the question of whether it was possible, whether it was scientifically possible, that Lana Clarkson had ended her own life in that foyer. And they built a theory. The theory was this: Lana Clarkson, the defense said, had picked up Phil Spector's revolver. She had placed the barrel of the revolver in her own mouth, and she had discharged it herself. The blood spatter on Phil Spector's white jacket, the defense said, was consistent not with him firing the weapon, but with him being close to her when she fired it on herself. The fingerprints on the revolver, the defense said, were inconclusive. The position of the body, the defense said, was consistent with suicide. And the defense had one more piece of evidence that they leaned on for years. The phrase that Phil Spector had said to his driver, quote, 11. The defense argued that this phrase did not mean what it appeared to mean. The defense argued that it was a phrase of guilt and shock from a man who had watched a woman take her own life in his home and who felt responsible, and who was expressing that responsibility in the language of confession, even though he had not committed a crime. A man, they said, who had watched a tragedy and blamed himself for it. But the prosecution had physical evidence of their own. They had the blood spatter on Phil Spector's jacket, which their experts said was consistent with him being the person holding the revolver when it discharged. They had the position of Lana Clarkson's hands, which did not show the characteristic underscore, quote, underscore, 1, 2, underscore, patterns typical of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the mouth. They had the fact that Lana Clarkson had left her handbag on the floor beside the chair, and a woman who has decided to end her own life does not usually, at that moment, still be thinking about the location of her handbag. They had the testimony of the 5 women. They had the driver's statement. They had 40 years of pattern, and, more than any of that, they had one particular piece of forensic evidence that would become the centerpiece of the trial. They had Lana Clarkson's tongue. When a firearm is discharged into the mouth at close range, the wound creates a specific pattern of damage. The tongue, in particular, shows lacerations and injuries that forensic pathologists can read like a book. The pathology of Lana Clarkson's tongue indicated, according to the prosecution's experts, that the revolver had been placed into her mouth forcibly, that her lips had been pulled back, that her teeth had been chipped in a way inconsistent with her placing the weapon there herself, that the angle of the wound was inconsistent with self-infliction. The prosecution's theory, in plain language, was that Phil Spector had decided, at some point during those 2 hours inside the castle, when Lana Clarkson, like the 5 women before her, had told him she wanted to leave, to pick up his revolver, walk over to where she was sitting, and force the barrel of that weapon into her mouth. And that when he pulled the trigger, 40 years of pattern had reached their end. The first trial began in April of 2007. The lead defense attorney was a man named Bruce Cutler. If that name sounds familiar, it is because Bruce Cutler was the attorney who had defended John Gotti, the Gambino crime family boss, through multiple federal trials in New York in the 1980s and 90s. He was a loud, aggressive, Brooklyn-style defense attorney, and Phil Spector had hired him to bring that style to a California courtroom. It did not work. Bruce Cutler, over the course of several months of the trial, alienated the judge, alienated the jury, and alienated the other attorneys on the defense team. He was eventually replaced mid-trial by other defense counsel. But the damage to the defense's case and to Phil Spector's public image was already being done. The trial was a circus. Celebrity spectators came and went. Phil Spector appeared in court wearing a series of increasingly elaborate wigs, blonde, black, curly, afro style, that made him look less like a defendant and more like a figure from a traveling carnival. The jury watched him every day. They took note. The prosecution called the 5 women, one by one, over a period of 2 weeks. Dorothy Melvin described the revolver through her car window. Melissa Grosvenor described the night in his home. Stephanie Jennings described the hotel suite in New York. Diane Ogden Holder described the revolver at her head. Devra Robitaille described the threat to kill her if she left the room. The jury sat there and listened. 5 women, 40 years, one pattern. The prosecution called Adriano De Souza, the driver. He spoke in broken English. The defense attempted to impeach his testimony by suggesting that he could not have heard what he claimed to have heard, could not have understood the words, was an unreliable immigrant witness. The jury did not appear to be persuaded. Adriano De Souza had been repeating the same 5 words in the same way for 4 years. He was consistent. He was believable. "I think I killed somebody." He said it the way Phil Spector had said it to him, on the driveway at 5 in the morning. The prosecution called their forensic experts. The defense called theirs. The trial stretched on for 5 months, and in September of 2007, the jury went into deliberations. They deliberated for 12 days. The jury came back and told the judge they were deadlocked. 10 jurors had voted to convict Phil Spector of second-degree murder. 2 jurors had voted to acquit. The judge declared a mistrial. The prosecution had come within 2 votes of a conviction and had walked away with nothing. The case would have to be retried from the beginning. And here Miles' Ghost Hunter pauses. Because a mistrial in a high-profile case like this one is a moment of enormous risk for the prosecution. The defense now knows their playbook. The defense now knows which arguments resonated with jurors and which did not. A second trial, historically, favors the defendant because memories fade, witnesses move on, evidence decays, and the public loses interest. Phil Spector's defense team believed they had a real chance of a full acquittal in a retrial. They reassembled. They brought in a new lead defense attorney, a man named Doron Weinberg, a California criminal defense specialist, more understated than Bruce Cutler, better suited to the judge and the jury and the local style of California criminal practice. They prepared to fight again. The prosecution reassembled as well. They brought in a new lead prosecutor, an experienced deputy district attorney named Truc Do, a Vietnamese-American prosecutor whose quiet, methodical style in court would become the emotional opposite of Bruce Cutler's carnival from the first trial. The second trial began in October of 2008. It was a different kind of trial. There were no celebrity spectators. There were no cameras in the courtroom this time. The judge had restricted media access. Phil Spector appeared in the same courtroom day after day, but the wigs were gone. He wore a grey suit. He wore his real hair, which was thinner and greyer than it had been 6 years earlier. He was 69 years old. He had been out on bail at Pyrenees Castle for the entire 6 years since the death of Lana Clarkson. He had been married in the intervening years to a woman in her 20s. The prosecution called the 5 women again. They told the same stories. The second jury, 12 new jurors, none of whom had served on the first jury, heard the same pattern. The prosecution called Adriano De Souza again. He gave the same testimony. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence. The defense presented theirs. This time, the trial moved more quickly. This time without the circus atmosphere of the first trial, without Bruce Cutler, without the wigs. The evidence itself stood in the center of the courtroom. The evidence did not get better for the defense the second time around. If anything, it got worse. Because now the prosecution had 5 years of preparation. They had rehearsed every argument. They knew which of the defense's expert witnesses to target and how. The defense's experts, Henry Lee in particular, had been impeached during the first trial over allegations that he had mishandled evidence at the crime scene, and those allegations followed them into the second trial. On April 13, 2009, after 6 months of trial and 9 days of deliberations, the second jury returned a verdict. Guilty. Second-degree murder. Phil Spector sat in the courtroom and heard the word. He did not react. He was 69 years old. He had spent 6 years fighting the case. He had spent millions of dollars. He had done everything that the American legal system allows a wealthy defendant to do in his own defense. And he had lost. 1 month later, he was sentenced. 19 years to life in the California state prison system. He would not be eligible for parole until he was 88 years old. He was sent first to the California Reception Center and then, eventually, to the California Substance Abuse Treatment Facility at Corcoran. It is a state prison in the Central Valley of California, surrounded by farmland and dust. Phil Spector spent the final 12 years of his life inside its walls. And now I want to bring you back to the people. Because the story of Phil Spector in prison is the story of a man who, at the end, had everything he had built turned into a single question. But the story of Lana Clarkson was never finished. It was only stopped. Her mother, Lana Clarkson, became the private face of the long struggle for justice in this case. Through 2 trials, through 2 juries, through the 6 years of Phil Spector being free on bail, while the court system processed his wealth through its procedural machinery, Lana Clarkson showed up. She sat in the courtroom. She did not give interviews. She said, quietly, that she wanted the trial to end, and she wanted her daughter's name to be remembered as something other than the answer to a trivia question about a famous murder. She died in 2015. The 5 women who testified, Dorothy Melvin, Melissa Grosvenor, Stephanie Jennings, Diane Ogden Holder, and Deborah Robitaille, went back to their lives. Some of them gave interviews, some of them did not. They had known, each of them, for years or for decades, that the pattern they had survived was not only theirs. They had not known each other until the case brought them together. And when they compared notes, they realized that what had happened to each of them individually had been happening to women, one at a time, in that house and others like it, across 40 years of a famous man's private life. Adriano De Souza, the driver, went back to Brazil for a time. He had done the single thing that a working man in his position should not have to do in a country that is not his own. He had told the truth about his employer. He had given his testimony, in a language he was still learning, through 2 trials, and he had been attacked for it by attorneys who made more money, and a wife visited him for a time, and then, eventually stopped visiting. His health declined. In early January of 2021, he was hospitalized with complications from COVID-19. On January 16, 2021, he died in a prison hospital in California. He was 81 years old. The news was reported around the world. The obituaries struggled with the same question that had hung over him from the morning of February 3, 2003. How to write the life of a man who had built some of the most beautiful sounds in American popular music, and who had also, at the end, become a convicted murderer. Some obituaries led with the Beatles. Some led with Lana Clarkson. None of them got it right. None of them could get it right, because the life of Phil Spector was 2 lives, and the music that he made will outlive the crime that he committed, and the crime that he committed will outlive any of us who remember the music. The two facts do not resolve. They sit next to each other, permanently, in the record. Lana Clarkson is buried in Los Angeles. She would have been 63 years old this year. She was not a B-movie actress. She was not a hostess at the House of Blues. Those were jobs she held. She was a daughter. She was a sister. She was a woman who said yes to one more drink on a Sunday night in February because she was tired and she was optimistic, and she believed that the man offering her the drink was just a man offering her a drink. Phil Spector built the wall of sound. Layer after layer of instrumentation, stacked on top of each other, mixed together, creating a thickness and a density of sound that no producer before him had ever created. It was the single most recognizable sonic signature of the 1960s. It changed everything about how records were made. And on one morning, in a castle in Alhambra, California, in the silence that followed the firing of a single revolver in a tiled foyer, Phil Spector built his last sound. A sound that was finally only one layer thick. A sound that lasted less than a second. A sound that ended the life of a woman who was trying to leave his house. He built the most beautiful sounds in American popular music. He died inside the sound of one shot. Miles, GhostHunter has been here with you. The file on Lana Clarkson is closed. The file on Phil Spector is closed. But the files on the other famous men who built empires on the backs of women they hurt, those files are open. And in the next episode, we open one of them. Chandra Levy, Washington, D.C., a congressman, a disappearance, a body in a park, and a scandal that a government tried to bury. Do not look away. I will see you there.